Welcome back to the deep dive. I hope you are somewhere comfortable.
Yes, hopefully somewhere quiet.
Right, exactly. Maybe you've dimmed the lights, or maybe you've got your noise-canceling headphones on to just block out the chaos of the day.
It definitely helps for this kind of material.
Because tonight, well, tonight we are going inward. Yeah, I don't mean just your standard mindfulness inward. I mean, we are looking at the actual machinery behind the curtain of reality itself.
It really is a fascinating area. We are dealing with the structure of perception, the physics of time, or rather, the illusion of time, and some surprisingly practical advice on how to navigate the dream state.
Yeah, and some highly controversial advice on that last part, which we will definitely get to.
Oh, absolutely.
And look, I know we cover a lot of topics on this show, history, tech, science, but tonight we're getting into what some people might call high strangeness. We are diving back into the Seth material. Specifically, we are looking at session 289.
Which is part of the early sessions, book 7 of the Seth material.
Right. And for those of you listening who might be new to this, or if you just stumbled in from the cold and have no idea what we're talking about, let's set the scene a bit.
Always a good idea.
Imagine it's Wednesday, September 28th, 1966. It's 9:00 p.m. We are in a living room in Elmira, New York. You've got Jane Roberts, the author and medium, and her husband, Rob Butts. And then you have Seth.
Right, and Seth describes himself as an energy personality essence no longer focused in physical reality. He speaks through Jane while she is in a trance state.
And tonight's session, I mean, it is a banger. We are talking about how the physical world is basically a video game screen for an electromagnetic code that we can't even see.
Yes, the concept of translation.
We are talking about why time is actually just emotion wearing a trench coat. and this is honestly my absolute favorite part. We have a disincarnate entity giving us sleep hygiene tips.
Specifically, endorsing the consumption of caffeine for lucid dreaming. It is certainly a counterintuitive take, especially by modern medical standards.
It's wild. But before we unravel the fabric of space-time and get you all wired on espresso, we have to do the housekeeping.
Of course.
So, mandatory statement here. This podcast is distributed free of charge on all major platforms for educational purposes. We are exploring the content found in the Seth material, which is published by the New Awareness Network.
And as always, we strongly encourage you to go to the source. Don't just take our word for any of this.
Right, we are just guides here.
Exactly. The map is in the books. So please, study the Seth material books and visit the New Awareness Network website and bookstore at sethcenter.com/ye-early sessions. Buy the books. Support the preservation of this material. It is dense, it is deep, and it is entirely worth reading in the original text.
Completely agree. So, mission parameters for tonight's deep dive. We are going to unpack Seth's explanation of translation, like how we literally translate energy into physical objects.
We will also look at the mechanics of dream projection.
And we're going to figure out why Seth sounds the way he does. The static of the soul, so to speak. You ready to get weird?
I am always ready to analyze the unseen.
Let's do it. So, right out of the gate, Seth drops this massive bombshell in the very first paragraph of the session. He starts talking about inner perceptions.
Yes, the very foundation of his philosophy.
And he makes this statement. He says, exterior reality is a materialization of inner electromagnetic reality.
This is the core concept of the entire session. In fact, if you don't grasp this specific point, the rest of the conversation about time and dreams just won't land.
It's basically flipping the script on how we view everything around us.
Precisely. Usually we think the physical world is the real thing, the hard stuff, the desk, the microphone, the chair, and we think our thoughts or feelings are these ephemeral, ghostly things floating around inside our heads.
Right.
Seth is saying no. The electromagnetic reality, the inner data, is the primary source. The physical world is just the end result.
Okay, let's unpack that term. Electromagnetic reality. It sounds like sci-fi techno-babble, but he's being quite literal here, isn't he?
He is. He's talking about physics. He says that all experience is electromagnetically coded. Okay. Think of it this way. Imagine you are playing a highly advanced video game. On your screen, you see trees, buildings, weather. It looks solid.
Right, if you walk your character into a wall, they stop.
Exactly. It is real within the context of the game. But what is that wall, really?
It's just code.
Yeah.
Zeros and ones, electrical signals processing on a silicon chip somewhere.
Right. The code is the inner reality. The screen is the exterior reality. Seth is telling us that our physical senses, our eyes, our ears, our fingertips, they are not just passive windows letting the outside world in.
They're active translators.
Yes. They are taking that raw electromagnetic code and rendering it into a three-dimensional environment that we can navigate.
So when I look at this coffee mug on the desk in front of me, I am not seeing the mug as it exists in its raw base state. I'm seeing the user interface version of the mug.
That is a perfect analogy. You are seeing the rendered graphic. I want to quote the session here because his phrasing is crucial. He says, "You are not aware of the direct inner perception. The physical organism cannot perceive it, hence some necessary transformations."
Hence some necessary transformations.
The key word there is transformations. The body is effectively a transducer. It has to step down the voltage, so to speak, or translate the file format so your conscious mind can handle the data without burning out.
That is just chilling. I mean, in a very cool way, the chilling. Because it implies that if you could somehow turn off the translator, if you could bypass the screen entirely, the world would look completely different.
Well, it wouldn't look like anything, not in the visual sense we understand. It would just be pure data, pure intensity.
Wow.
Seth mentions that the inner senses pick up this data directly as electromagnetic pulsations, but because we are physical creatures, we absolutely need the translation. We need the user interface just to play the game. If you saw the raw code, you couldn't walk across the room.
It reminds me of that scene in The Matrix. I know, it's a classic, overused reference, but when Neo finally sees the green code dripping down the walls, he stops seeing the physical hallway and starts seeing the data structure.
It is a very apt comparison.
Seth is basically saying we are all Neo, but we are permanently stuck in the simulation rendering mode because our biological hardware demands it.
The biological hardware is indeed the limiting factor. Our nervous system is specifically designed to filter out 99% of reality so we can focus on survival in the remaining 1%.
So if reality is just a biological translation of these electromagnetic pulses, does that mean the physical world is fake?
Not fake, just derivative. It is a construction. Seth is saying that the inner data is the bedrock of existence. The physical objects are simply how we make sense of that bedrock.
And he goes even further to explain why we organize this data the way we do. Which leads us to the second major concept of this session. And honestly, this one is way harder for me to wrap my head around.
The nature of time.
Yeah, time. This is where I had to pause the reading and just stare blankly at the wall for a minute. Because Seth says time isn't real. Or at least it is not what we think it is at all.
This is where many people struggle with the Seth material. Our experience of time is so rigid. We live by the clock, we age, we have schedules.
But Seth basically says time is just stretched out emotion.
He states that the intensity of an experience, rather than its duration in time, determines its effect.
Intensity determines effect. Okay, so normally we think of time as a ruler. Seconds, minutes, hours. It is a straight line. It's a container that events happen inside of.
But Seth is proposing something entirely different. Let's break down the mechanics he offers here. He says an experience is composed of those electromagnetic pulsations we just talked about. Now here is the critical part. These pulsations have depth, but they do not have space.
Depth, but no space.
Right. They exist in a state of pure intensity. But our physical brains cannot process infinite depth all at once. It would overwhelm the circuitry of the nervous system.
So what do? We can't handle the depth, so we just fake it.
We stretch it out. We take that vertical depth of intensity and we flatten it into a horizontal line of time.
Whoa. Okay, let me try to get a practical example here because I really need to visualize this. You know how when you were in a really, really boring meeting?
I am unfortunately very familiar with that phenomenon.
Right, it feels like you've been sitting there for 3 hours.
Yeah.
But you look at the clock and it's literally been 12 minutes. That is low intensity. It is dragged out.
Yes.
But then think about a car crash. Or let's go with the positive example. Your first kiss. Or the exact moment you see your kid being born. It feels like time completely stops. Or it feels like an entire lifetime happens in a split second.
That is the intensity breaking through the illusion of duration. When the emotional intensity is high enough, the translation mechanism, the mental function that creates time, starts to glitch. You get closer to the raw reality, which is simultaneous.
Oh, man.
Seth says, and again I'll quote here, because of your own basic assumptions, such experiences are played back in such a manner that a traveling through intensities results in a journey through time.
Traveling through intensities. I just love that phrase so much. It sounds like a progressive rock band album title. But it really fundamentally changes how you view your life if you actually accept it.
It does. It removes the linearity.
It means we aren't moving from Monday to Tuesday. We are moving from one emotional state to another emotional state, and our brain just slaps the label Tuesday on it to keep us sane.
It creates a linear narrative out of a nonlinear reality. And Seth connects this directly back to the inner senses. He says the inner senses perceive the experience simultaneously, boom, all at once, the entire whole event.
But the physical self can't do that.
Exactly. The physical self has to play it back track by track.
Oh, it's like the difference between looking at a vinyl record where the whole disc, all the music, is just sitting there at once,
Yeah.
and actually playing the record where you only hear the song note by note.
That is a phenomenal metaphor. The record itself is the electromagnetic reality. It exists as a complete simultaneous whole. The music playing, that linear experience of melody and rhythm over minutes, is physical time. The needle is your consciousness moving through the grooves.
So if I could somehow lift the needle, I could jump to any track.
Theoretically, yes. That is exactly what Seth implies happens in certain altered states or in dreams. You are no longer bound by the linear playback mechanism. You can access the whole record.
Which perfectly brings us to the Friday episode. Because Seth doesn't just leave all this as abstract quantum physics. He applies it to something very specific that happened to Jane and Rob just a few days prior to the session.
Yes, this refers to September 23rd, 1966. Apparently, there was a spontaneous psychic event in their living room.
Right. Now, the text itself doesn't give us every gritty detail of the event, but Seth analyzes the mechanics behind it. It involved a girl who isn't named in the specific text, but her emotional state is central to what happened.
And Seth uses the story to explain the actual physics of how we connect with other people psychically. He calls the girl's emotional condition a psychological bridge.
This is fascinating to me because it implies that emotions are not just internal private feelings. We tend to think, oh, I feel sad inside my head.
But Seth is saying emotions are structural.
Right. They are like infrastructure in the non-physical world. Jane was able to project, to send her consciousness out by walking across the bridge of this other girl's intense emotion.
So the emotion acted as a carrier wave.
Exactly. The girl's highly charged state created a literal pathway. Jane, being highly sensitive, hooked onto that pathway and rode it.
But it wasn't just the girl's emotion acting alone. Seth talks extensively about the balance of the room. This part felt very much like a chemistry class.
Yes, like if you mix the wrong chemicals, nothing happens or something explodes.
He talks about the specific mix of personalities present. He notes that the environment was highly charged, yet well-balanced.
And he says if another emotionally oriented person had been present, the balance would have been upset and nothing would have happened.
And had another passive person been present, the same rule would apply.
That is incredibly specific. It's exactly like electrical circuits. You need a positive and a negative terminal. If you have too many live wires, meaning emotional people in the room, the circuit shorts out.
And if you have too many grounds or passive people, the current just doesn't flow at all.
It explains so much about why ghost hunting or seances or even just creative brainstorming sessions sometimes work brilliantly and other times completely flop. It is not about everyone believing hard enough. It is about balancing the circuit.
Precisely. You need the emotional propulsion, but you also desperately need the grounding.
And speaking of propulsion and grounding, we really have to talk about the safety mechanisms here. Because if Jane is tapping into this high-voltage emotional reality, this raw code we talked about, wouldn't that burn her out? Like literally fry her physical nervous system?
That is a very valid concern, and Seth addresses it directly. He explains that the physical organism, the body, and the subconscious mind develops a neutralizing element.
A psychic surge protector.
Effectively, yes. He says the organism itself forms this as a self-protective mechanism. It protects the physical system against the full, raw voltage of the emotional charge.
How does that actually work, though? Is it like a mental shield you have to consciously put up?
It seems to be much more biological than that, or at least operating automatically at the interface of biology and the psyche. The system allows the raw information to pass through, but it automatically strips away the destructive level of intensity.
Okay, I see.
It translates the raw emotional electricity into something the conscious mind can observe without being totally overwhelmed.
So it's like looking at the sun. If you just stare at the sun, you go blind. But if you look at the sun through a thick welder's mask, you can safely see the shape of it. The neutralizing element is the welder's mask.
That is a brilliant way to put it. And it shows that exploring these deep psychic states isn't inherently dangerous, provided you trust the body's natural defenses. The system intuitively knows how to handle the current, as long as you don't force it past its natural limits.
Which brings us nicely to the dynamic between Jane and Rob. Because in this scenario, Rob is definitely not the surge protector. Rob is more like the guy standing on the sidelines with the safety manual, constantly worried about OSHA regulations.
That is a very humorous but highly accurate way to frame it. Seth spends a good portion of the session analyzing the tug-of-war dynamic between Jane, whom he calls Rupert, and Rob, whom he calls Joseph.
Right. Rob is the scribe. He is the one sitting there writing all this down in shorthand as Jane speaks it. But Seth points out that Rob is terrified of emotional demonstrations.
Rob vastly prefers control. He prefers intellectual understanding. He likes clear charts, definitions, and logic. Jane, on the other hand, is much more impulsive. She is intuitive and willing to just jump into the fire.
But Seth reveals something super nuanced about this dynamic. He says the conflict between them, Rob's extreme caution versus Jane's desire to let go, is actually what makes the whole thing work.
Yes, he states that the conflict itself results in energy. The withheld emotional energy acts as a propellant.
That completely blew my mind. We usually think conflict is a bad thing. We think, oh, I am blocked, I have fear, I can't do this. But Seth is saying the resistance itself is the fuel.
Think of a slingshot. You have to pull the band backward. That pulling back is the resistance. It's the refusal to go forward.
Right.
That tension creates immense potential energy. When you finally release the band, the projectile flies much further and faster than if you had just thrown it with your hand. Rob's fear, his constant pulling back, actually helps build the necessary charge that allows Jane to launch into these deep trance states.
So if Rob was just totally chill about it, like, sure, honey, go astral project, have fun, there wouldn't be enough tension to launch her.
It is highly likely. The friction creates the spark. If everyone in the room is too relaxed, the energy just dissipates into the air. You need that psychological containment to build up the pressure.
Seth even calls out a specific dream that Rob had to illustrate this exact point. The window dream.
Yes, the window dream. Rob had a highly lucid dream where he was standing at an open window, fully aware that he could fly or project his consciousness out into the night. But he completely refused. He simply wouldn't jump because he was afraid of falling.
Which is hilarious if you think about it, because it is a dream. You cannot go splat on the pavement in a dream, but his brain was literally like, nope, unsafe working conditions, we are staying inside the building.
Seth validates that fear, though. He doesn't mock Rob for it at all. He says to him, "You are fine here."
Right.
He explains that the refusal to jump was a completely natural safety check. Rob simply wasn't ready. And because Seth deeply respects the spontaneous nature of existence, he strongly warns against forcing these experiences.
That is such a key takeaway for anyone listening who is actively trying to learn this stuff, whether it's deep meditation, out-of-body experiences, or lucid dreaming. If you are scared, that is okay. The fear is a boundary your own system put up for a very good reason.
Yeah.
Don't pry the door open with a crowbar. Just let the pressure build until it opens naturally.
Exactly. Seth advises that a feeling of expansiveness and discipline should be maintained, but strictly in that order.
Expansiveness first.
Yes. Expansiveness first, then discipline. If you apply rigid discipline too early, you crush the spontaneity of the experience. But if you have only expansiveness with no discipline, you have absolutely no control over where you go.
Now, speaking of control, we really have to talk about the voice. If you have ever heard the actual audio recordings of Seth speaking through Jane, and you can find them easily online, Jane's voice drastically changes.
It becomes much deeper, stronger, and highly rhythmic.
But it's not, well, it's not emotional. It is almost robotic sometimes. It's definitely unique cadence.
Rob actually asks about this, or at least implies the question in his notes for the session. He wonders why the material is often delivered in such an unemotional, flat tone. Why doesn't Seth sound like he is crying or laughing or shouting? Why is it just this steady, relentless stream of data?
And Seth gives an answer that makes perfect sense if you think about it from the perspective of audio engineering. He talks about static.
He does. He says, when I come through in an emotional manner at all, this is often transformed into the loud voice, an overvolume, a static.
He's basically saying his core emotional energy is too high gain for the hardware. If he pushes his true raw feelings through Jane's physical vocal cords, it is like plugging a heavy metal guitar directly into a cheap, tiny laptop speaker.
The speaker distorts.
Exactly. It completely blows the speaker.
He notes that Jane focuses the energy directly at the vocal cords, which naturally causes physical difficulty for her. If he were to pour his full personality and all his emotional weight into that delicate physical connection, Jane's voice box simply couldn't handle the modulation.
It would just be noise.
Yes, it would result in incomprehensible noise, not articulate words. So to be understood at all, to get these complex concepts across clearly to Rob, Seth has to massively dampen the signal. He has to strip out the emotion so the data can come through without the static.
Which is kind of heartbreaking, right? He even says it is unfortunate because his emotional energy is the very thing that powers the material. He's basically reaching out from an entirely different dimension with his huge, expansive love and intensity, but he has to compress it into a monotone college lecture just so we can understand the vocabulary.
He states very clearly, without this reaching out to you, the material could not be delivered. It is a deeply symbiotic relationship. He absolutely needs them to anchor the physical signal, and they desperately need him to dial the energy back so they don't get physically overwhelmed.
It really puts the dryness of some of the Seth books into a whole new light. The material isn't dry because Seth is a boring entity. It is dry because the file is highly compressed for our safety.
It really humanizes Seth, or I suppose, entitizes him. He's not a cold computer. He is a vibrant personality forced to communicate through an incredibly narrow bandwidth.
And he does offer a little bit of hope there. He says that with more practice over time, they might be able to handle a stronger emotional rapport. But for right now, clarity of the data is the absolute priority.
Which is completely understandable given the complexity of what they're discussing.
Okay, so we have covered the nature of physical reality as code, the physics of time as emotion, the dynamic tension of fear, and the mechanics of channeling a non-physical entity. But now we finally get to the part that I'm literally going to try tonight when I go to sleep.
Ah, yes, the practical magic segment of the session.
Seth's highly specific advice on coffee.
This is truly one of those moments where the Seth material diverges sharply from standard modern medical advice.
I mean, if you go to a sleep doctor today, what is rule number 1? No caffeine after 2 in the afternoon, no coffee, no black tea, no energy drinks. They will tell you it ruins your sleep architecture and completely messes up your REM cycles.
And chemically speaking, that is generally true for the average person. But Seth suggests that for the specific and targeted purpose of dream work and conscious projection, caffeine can actually be a highly potent tool.
He says if coffee does not prevent or inhibit sleep, it will stimulate dream projections.
The operative phrase in that quote is, if it does not prevent sleep. If you are highly sensitive to caffeine and a single cup of coffee keeps you staring at the bedroom ceiling for 4 hours with your heart racing, this technique will absolutely fail. You have to be able to actually fall asleep.
Right.
But if you are one of those people who can drink an espresso and still drift off, Seth argues that the caffeine helps bring your critical faculties directly into the dream state with you.
The critical faculty. That is the part of your waking brain that says, wait a minute, why is there a giant purple elephant cooking eggs in my kitchen right now? It's the logic center.
Exactly. Usually that critical part of the mind shuts off completely when we dream, which is exactly why we passively accept bizarre, physics-defying stuff as totally normal.
But when the critical faculty is asleep, you are just a passive observer of the dream script. You just go along with whatever the dream throws at you.
However, when the critical faculty is awake within the dream environment, you become lucid. You suddenly realize, wait, I am dreaming. You gain conscious agency.
And Seth is saying caffeine acts as a specific biological stimulant for that exact part of the mind, keeping it just active enough to trigger lucidity while the physical body remains deeply relaxed in slumber.
That is the mechanism he is proposing, yes. It acts as a chemical anchor for your conscious awareness while you purposefully drift into the subconscious realms.
So an espresso before bed equals lucid dreaming. I'm so trying this.
Theoretically. But he heavily contrasts this with alcohol, which I think is a very important distinction to make because a lot of people rely on a nightcap to help them wind down and sleep.
Seth is super clear on this. He says alcohol will not help in this particular case.
Because alcohol is a central nervous system depressant, it completely dulls the critical faculty. It might successfully knock you unconscious, but your dreams will be muddy, vague, unremembered, or you will just be totally blank. It chemically suppresses the exact mental alertness you need to achieve conscious projection.
It's so interesting because he also briefly touches on the wake back to bed method, which is like a massive thing in the modern lucid dreaming community today.
He does indeed. He says, if you are awakened for any reason during the night, the chances for a conscious projection on your return to sleep are somewhat higher.
This is standard operating procedure now. You set an alarm for 4 a.m., you get out of bed, maybe you read a book for 20 minutes, have a sip of water, or coffee apparently, and then you go back to sleep. Your brain is totally primed. And Seth was casually giving this advice in 1966, way before lucid dreaming was even a popular mainstream term, and decades before Stephen LaBerge was doing his clinical research at Stanford.
It strongly validates the consistency of the underlying mechanics. Whether you prefer to call it astral projection, out-of-body experiences, or lucid dreaming, the biological and psychological triggers seem to be entirely identical. Interrupted sleep combined with a stimulated critical faculty equals a significantly higher probability of a conscious non-physical experience.
I just love how relentlessly practical this is. Amidst all the heavy philosophical talk of electromagnetic universes and time being an illusion, he's just like, yeah, have a cup of joe and wake up in the middle of the night, you'll figure it out.
Yeah.
It beautifully grounds all the woo-woo concepts in physical, biological reality.
And speaking of grounding things in reality, we absolutely have to mention the artifacts included with this session.
Oh, yes, the envelope. I'm so glad you included this in your notes.
Included in the original source material for session 289 is a photocopy of a physical envelope. It is from the Crowley-Taylor Lumber Company, and it is addressed to Mr. Bob Butts.
It is just so aggressively mundane. It's a lumber company envelope. Why on earth is it included in a text about the fabric of reality? Are we talking about mystical lumber?
It provides essential historical context. During the session, they briefly take a break to discuss a physical letter they received from a Dr. Eugene Bernard.
Right.
He was a psychologist from North Carolina State University who explicitly wanted to visit them. He wanted to study Jane and observe Seth firsthand.
So here they are, in the middle of talking to a literal disincarnate entity about the fundamental nature of time, space, and human consciousness. And then suddenly it's like, oh, hey, did we get that letter back from Dr. Bernard? Is he coming over for Thanksgiving dinner?
It serves as a necessary grounding wire for them and for the reader. It reminds us that despite all this high-level metaphysical exploration, they are still living in the physical world. They have to check their mail, they have holiday plans to make, they have regular social obligations.
And Seth totally leans into it too.
Yes, sir.
He validates their mundane concerns. He says, you are fine here, and the meeting will take place. He even casually offers to give them psychic impressions of the doctor later on.
Seth acting as the psychic consultant for upcoming Thanksgiving dinner guests.
I love it.
Yeah.
But seriously, that balance between the profound and the mundane is so incredibly important. If you get too lost in the esoteric woo-woo stuff, you completely disconnect from your actual life. But if you get too stuck in the material world, the lumber envelopes, you miss the underlying magic of how it all works. You need the lumber company envelope, and you need the electromagnetic reality to have a complete human experience.
That is the essence of this deep dive in a nutshell, synthesizing the two realities. We aren't trying to escape our physical reality. We are simply trying to understand the deeper hidden layers of it.
So as we wrap up this session, what does this all practically mean for you, the listener? We have covered a massive amount of ground today.
I think the single biggest takeaway is the concept of translation. We all walk around totally convinced that what our eyes see, the walls of our room, the sky outside, our own faces in the mirror, is the absolute objective truth. But if we accept Seth's premise, we are just looking at a biological translation, a highly filtered user interface.
It genuinely frees you. In a way, if time is just stretched out emotion, you can theoretically change your experience of time just by changing your emotional state. If reality is essentially electromagnetic code, maybe you can learn to hack it. Or at the very least, you can understand why it is rendering the way it is rendering for you.
And it powerfully suggests that the inner self is not some distant, unapproachable, mystical thing. It is the active generator of the physical reality you are walking through right this very second. You are constantly, actively translating your own inner energy into the physical objects and events around you.
And hey, if you want to explore that inner generator tonight, maybe brew a small cup of coffee at 11:00 p.m. and see what happens when you close your eyes.
But please, do so responsibly. Results may certainly vary. And if you are up all night staring at the ceiling fan, do not blame Seth. Blame your own critical faculty for simply being too good at its job.
Results may vary indeed.
And remember, fear can be a potent propellant. If you feel resistance to these wild ideas or resistance to trying these projection techniques, that is just energy building up in your system. Don't force it. Just let it build naturally until you are truly ready to launch.
I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over as you drift off tonight, caffeinated or not. Seth says our physical eyes literally translate invisible energy into solid objects. So if you could somehow stop translating for just one single second, what would you actually see? Would you see the raw code? Would you see blinding light? Or would you see absolutely nothing at all because the very act of seeing is just a physical habit?
That is the ultimate question.
A huge thank you to the New Awareness Network for keeping this incredible material alive and accessible. This deep dive was based entirely on session 289 of the early sessions, Book 7 of the Seth material.
You can find that specific book and all the others in the series at sethcenter.com/early sessions. We simply cannot recommend them enough. They are an absolute treasure trove of insight.
We will be back next time with another stack of papers, another bizarre rabbit hole, and another deep dive. Until then,
See you in the dream state.
good night, everyone.